Hi, I'm Sheldon McLeod, and welcome to this space, my opportunity for us to talk a little bit about things that, interest me. And I have to say, I talk a lot about politics, and I was very interested to see this survey that was just released. Canadians lack basics of civic education, and quite the headline, it's impacting our democracy. And to talk with us about that study, we have Oksana, and good day to you, Oksana. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Tell me a little bit about Abacus and this study. Where did it come from?
Yeah, so Abacus is a public affairs and market research firm. We do a lot of work on all sorts of issues, but a lot of work in the public affairs space. So always looking at issues that are being discussed in different levels of government. And so one of the things that we were curious about, both with our work with civics, but also just in general, was to understand a little bit more of Canadians' background and their civic education experience. Do they remember anything about it? And how it's influencing their lives today, especially as citizens.
A third of Canadian adults don't recall learning anything about civics in school. Does that mean they weren't taught?
So the question wording is recall. So we're asking folks to remember if they remember learning anything. But I think in a way, it's a little bit of a proxy to show and almost even more telling that if folks don't remember being taught things, perhaps it wasn't taught the right way.
Why is this concerning? Why should this be some sort of a flag for us?
Yeah, so beyond just looking at whether or not people recall learning things, which I think is a measure in of itself of things that need to improve a little bit in our education system, I was really curious to understand what the implications are for Canadians today. I think the obvious one is are people who remember learning these things more or less likely to vote? But also, I think, and just as important, are the conversations that we're having or not having, and how education sort of sets us up for success or failure in that. And so what we found, which is not great, but perhaps not surprising, is that folks who can't recall learning about how institutions and governments work are 10 points less likely to say they voted in the last federal election, and also much less likely to say they're going to vote in the future.
That is quite telling, considering the overall voter rate or turnout rate has been declining, specifically here in Nova Scotia over the last number of elections, and I think you could say that trend continues across the country. So there's some case to be made that it goes right back to what you did or did not take from your lessons in school about civics.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's other sort of signals about not only the recall, but sort of if you had a good foundation for your civics education, you're more likely to remember learning it, but also that means you're more likely to apply the skills that you learned beyond just voting and showing up to vote. We also looked at whether or not learning recall of learning civics education in school is impacting conversations. And we find that those who remember learning about civics are much more likely to like discussing social issues with their family and friends. They're also more likely, so people who've learned how to discuss controversial issues in school, so those conversation skills, are also a lot more likely to be like having conversations with people that they disagree with. So it's also about that sort of healthy conversation, healthy democracy piece that goes beyond just the voting booth. But if people aren't willing to engage in dialogue or show up, then it can really impact those pieces that build the foundation of a healthy democracy.
I thought this was very interesting. Those who didn't learn how to discuss controversial issues are more likely to avoid conversations with folks they disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't talk about that for a second, because I want to ask you a very specific question about that.
Yeah, so I think that was really one of the pieces that is really interesting, and I think is a piece reflective in the report that we worked on with civics is civic education is not just about learning who the prime minister is or learning about how to vote, but it's about having the dialogue and the conversations to address something that maybe isn't in your sort of realm of knowledge or something you like learning about. I know there's a lot of conversation about polarization and people being in bubbles and things like that. And so what we're seeing is if people aren't set up for success to have those conversations that are tough, no matter your background, they're less likely to try to build their knowledge or branch out or have those conversations and learn and become better citizens.
How does that apply to social media, where in some cases the loudest voices seem to be the ones that may not be the best informed about certain things that they're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting angle, and I'm hopeful that we'll continue to kind of explore that and how that looks about where folks get their information, who they like listening to, who they trust, all those sorts of pieces. I think this really sort of speaks to the importance of having conversations about issues that are important to us and impact our vote, but having conversations with people that don't always think like us. I know sometimes people kind of have an idea of what they want and what they want to vote for and kind of are stuck there. And that's great. But one of my sort of personal opinions is that we really grow either in strengthening your own beliefs or learning something new if you have those conversations that you might not have otherwise thought of yourself. And so when those are really starting to drop off, whether it be people aren't seeking that out or social media is creating that sort of environment, that's when things start to get concerning.
I think it would be remiss. No, I'd be remiss not to mention, people who talk about Canada and your Second Amendment, and there's so much influence by American politics on our system. I mean, the news release says, it's an election year 2024, and the U.S. election around the corner. Clearly, here we have municipal elections in Nova Scotia in the fall, and then next summer a provincial election with a federal election sometime between now and then. What's the lesson here? What should we take from this?
I think the lesson is to really work on civics education in K to 12, the folks in Canada who still are in that age group. But I think there's also a lesson here in that education and civics education sort of continues beyond the public education time and is really up to us to sort of have those opportunities to learn those skills, to become better conversationalists, to maybe branch out and have those difficult conversations. I think school is a great time where you get to practice skills, but that is maybe something that we lack when we get into adulthood. So just really sort of pushing yourself to become a better citizen beyond just learning a little bit about institutions. I mean, I think a lot of people maybe don't find that as exciting, but I think there's just as much value in learning about that or current events or how to discuss controversial issues, all sorts of things.
There are regional differences, you noted?
There are some regional differences, not too many. I know we're sort of on the East Coast here, so Atlantic Canada sort of fits right in the average, but we find that those in Quebec are less likely to say they recall learning about civics education, while folks on the prairies are more likely to recall.
And I guess a very specific question about a petition that was introduced asking for the government to, basically step aside. And what does that say to you about the popularity of some of the thought process out there about how Canada's electoral system works?
Yeah, I think there's, regardless of your views and positions on that, I think getting involved and learning how even a petition works and its impact and all those sorts of things is important. But I think what that also signals is kind of what these results are saying as well, and that there's an important lesson to be learned to keep dialogue going, keep conversations open with folks you might not agree with, and keep an open mind that you might learn something when having these conversations. You might not need to change your opinion, but just being open to having these conversations, I think, is something that's going to be really important to make sure we continue to have a healthy democracy.
We're going to talk with the folks involved with Civics, CIVIX, in just a second. Anything else that we should add or that something maybe I didn't ask about that you want to pass along, Oksana?
No, I don't think so. I think the folks from Civics will take it away from here.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So my name's Dimitri Pavlunas. I'm the research director at Civics. Civics is a nonpartisan charity dedicated to building the habits and skills of citizenship among youth under the voting age. And we do this primarily by creating experiential learning programs and curriculum materials for teachers.
And this series of investigation studies, opinion polls, did it surprise you that there are Canadians who don't recall ever learning about civics in school?
Not really. Just because of kind of what we've learned about, how civics is prioritized or rather not prioritized at school and how it's being taught, right? Because I think one of the big takeaways, hopefully for everybody seeing those stats, is that the issue is not that young Canadians aren't being taught civics. Civic education has long been mandated in every province and territory. It would be nearly impossible for someone to not go through K to 12 without being exposed to at least the basic nuts and bolts of how Canadian democracy operates. But what's really troubling, right, is that this experience is for many people quite literally forgettable, when really, civics should be as relevant to their lives as, literacy or basic numeracy. It should be teaching people, a set of everyday skills that are directly applicable to their lives.
Is it the course isn't properly aligned with what we need, or how do you see a way through this or out of this?
So there's a few competing things that's probably different in different contexts. One thing, though, that with our national survey that we found was that 64% of teachers said that they don't think that their schools value civics or citizenship education related or in relation to other subjects, right? So it's not a priority. They don't feel like it's a priority, and there's little incentive really for them to focus on it, or they feel like they don't have time to focus on it as much as they would like. A related issue is also kind of just the general lack of training and support for civics and for civics teachers. Teachers across the country are expected to teach civics. Some provinces like Nova Scotia have a mandatory civics class, but very few teachers have any formal training in civics or citizenship education. From our national survey, only 25% of teachers said that they had any formal training in their pre-service training in civics, right? And this isn't just a topic that one just knows how to teach well via intuition. It takes learning and it takes practice, and this also extends to professional development opportunities that teachers have once they're in the job. Across the country, PD is becoming rarer, yet teachers are expected to stay on top of numerous curricular changes.
And I suspect it doesn't matter whether we're talking municipal, provincial, or a federal election. We see that there are gaps and that there are opportunities here to perhaps reframe this conversation and learn about the processes involved. Is that how, am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, I think so, right? I think what it really comes down to, and in order to make this learning stick, is to get students to be able to connect the information they're learning about democratic processes, about civic processes, to issues they care about. And one thing that we've learned, and one thing that young people continually say and that teachers continually say, is that their students aren't apathetic. They care about issues. But if you ask them if they care about politics, they might say no, but they definitely care about issues that are political issues. And so it's really about helping them make that, bridge that gap between the issues that they really care about and these democratic processes that they might see as archaic, or they might see as unfriendly to them, and kind of helping them understand that, they actually can engage with these systems in a way that will hopefully affect change related to issues that they care about.
And I'm curious, if you're an optimist or a realist or a pessimist, what does this say to you? Are you hopeful?
I think I have to be hopeful. I think that's going to be the only way to be these days. Otherwise, it's so easy to doom and gloom. I think there is, an increasingly kind of loud conversation around these issues, and I think what keeps me hopeful are the teachers themselves. Even teachers who aren't getting support. We have incredible civic educators in this country. Atlantic Canada has, I would say, a disproportionate amount of amazing civic educators who really are passionate about these issues, who care, who want to do right, who want to make the time to make sure their students are invested. And so I believe, it can kind of start with them, and hopefully they can kind of gain the support they need to actually prioritize that, and we can make that experience that a lot of these kids are having more equitable for all students in Canada.
Yeah, I was interested to see that when people are not confident in the subject, they may avoid it, or the converse is, if they don't truly understand it, they may engage in a different way. How does a learning environment, how does a school, how does a teacher, a civics teacher, teach children how to debate, discuss, and have differences of opinions in a democratic system?
That's a great question. One of the most important things are just kind of mountains of research showing that, students who learn to discuss difficult political controversial issues in class are, more confident in talking about them, more engaged generally, more aware of the news, more open to other opinions. But that is a skill that is learned and that has to be practiced, and that takes a lot of patience from everybody involved. And so, there are certain things. So one thing that we promote, we have a program at Civics called Polytalks that is about kind of equipping teachers with some tools or ways that they can structure discussion to allow for students to express their opinions in hopefully, a safe environment that encourages active listening as much as it encourages, active talking.
Is there anything else, Dimitri, that is important to the conversation that I didn't ask?
Maybe the one other thing is just like is that we need to keep this as part of the conversation. And to reiterate what I said earlier is that civics and civic education should be treated as a course or as a topic as essential to everyday life as something like literacy or numeracy. So it should be part of that broader conversation about what we want to prioritize in our schools. Every student, regardless, we don't know students going in schools, we don't know what they're going to do for their jobs. But we do know that literally every student is going to be expected to express and use, the skills and competencies of citizenship. They're going to be called upon to be citizens in their communities. And so we need to better prepare them for that and prioritize that.